In 1991, Rick Moranis made a choice that shocked Hollywood. He was at the peak of his career. Ghostbusters had made him a star. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids turned him into a household name. Studios were throwing scripts at him. Then his wife Anne was diagnosed with cancer. She was only 35 when she died. What happened next changed everything. He turned down city slickers. He walked away from franchise deals worth millions. He chose something Hollywood rarely understands. But there's more to this story than just grief. What he did for the next 25 years will change how you see him. Rick Moranis was born Frederick Allen Moranis on April 18, 1953, in Toronto. And from the start, his world felt wide and full of sound. He grew up in a Jewish family, in a working-class neighborhood where everything felt close and familiar, and little moments often turned into the kind of jokes he later built his whole career on. He went to elementary school with Geddy Lee, long before Rush became a global name. They were just kids then, sitting in classrooms, wandering hallways, and soaking in the early pulse of Toronto's music scene without even knowing it. That early mix of friendship, culture, and humor settled deep inside him. It shaped how he listened, how he joked, and how he carried stories. His Jewish roots added another layer, the kind filled with family jokes, food memories, and a sense of identity that years later spilled into his 2013 album, My Mother's Brisket, where he played with those traditions like they were part of his heartbeat. By the mid-1970s, he was drifting toward radio. It felt like a space where he could breathe and invent. He worked under the name Rick Allen at stations like CFTR, CKFH, 1050 CHUM, and CHUM FM. The all-night slot at CHUM became his playground. While the city slept, he stayed awake in a booth filled with flickering lights, turning routines into little performances. He didn't just spin records, he wrote and produced bits, slipping jokes between songs. He teamed up with Rob Cowan, and together they created spoofs that people remembered long after the shows ended. Their take on Hockey Night in Canada became a crowd favorite at charity events and even ended up on CBC TV. Slowly, he carved out a rhythm, blending comedy and music in a way that no one else in Toronto radio was doing. That mix opened doors and eased him toward television. By 1977, he was stepping onto CBC's 90 Minutes Live with Ken Finkelman. The two created radio specials and pilots like Midweek and 1980, filmed right in CBC Toronto. Their humor grew sharper, sometimes darker, and sometimes so bold it shocked audiences. One sketch had Moranis playing a Canadian movie producer, pitching interviews with Nazi war criminals, while dubbed voices joked about Hollywood agents and documentary paychecks. It was risky, strange, and way ahead of its time. That edge helped define him. It made him the comedian who didn't shrink from uncomfortable ideas, but reshaped them into something people couldn't forget. These CBC experiments pushed him closer to a new direction, one that eventually led him to SCTV. His Jewish upbringing kept feeding his humor through this entire period. It was the place where he learned timing, warmth, sarcasm, and family-shaped comedy. Growing up around those traditions helped him see how culture and jokes could live together. Later, when he released My Mother's Brisket in 2013, it felt like he had gone back home for a moment. Every song and routine carried hints of holiday dinners, overprotective relatives, and the kind of identity humor that only comes from lived experience. That ability to turn personal history into something universal became one of his trademarks. But before any of that success settled in, he faced a wall. He auditioned for stage roles early on and quickly realized that live improv didn't suit him. The timing felt off. The energy didn't match him. Instead of breaking under that disappointment, he pivoted to radio. choosing a space where he could control the material and refine his own voice. That rejection became a turning point. It pushed him toward the path that eventually led to television, SCTV, and Hollywood. Sometimes one closed door points you toward the room where you truly belong, and that was exactly what happened to him. Everything shifted again in 1980 when Dave Thomas invited him to join SCTV for its third season. He became the only cast member who hadn't come through the Second City stage troupe, and that alone made his arrival feel electric. The show was moving from a Canadian network to CBC and then into US syndication, creating space for his impressions to reach more people. He slipped into characters like Woody Allen, Merv Griffin, George Carlin, Michael McDonald, David Brinkley, and even Terry Shields with a kind of precision that startled audiences. He made these impressions feel effortless. His timing, his voice changes, his tiny gestures, all of it worked together. During this time, the show needed 2 extra minutes of Canadian content. What started as filler turned into something unforgettable. Rick and Dave Thomas created Bob and Doug McKenzie, 2 laid-back Canadian brothers wrapped in winter clothes, drinking beer, tossing around the word hoser, and turning everyday conversations into silly detours. No one expected much from it, yet fans loved it instantly. When NBC ordered longer episodes in 1981, they specifically asked for Bob and Doug in every show because affiliates couldn't get enough. Soon, the characters spread beyond the screen. The Great White North album dropped in 1981 and sold more than 1 million copies, including 350,000 in Canada. It reached number 8 on the Billboard 200 and even earned a Grammy nomination. A joke that began as filler became a phenomenon that carried Moranis into a new level of fame. Another sketch showed how ahead of the curve he was. He played Jerry Todd, a disc jockey introducing music clips on SCTV, months before MTV appeared in 1981. The role became a parody of music television before music television existed. Martin Short even credited Moranis as the inventor of the VJ because he created the blueprint before the world realized it needed one. It was sharp, funny, and oddly prophetic. In 1982, SCTV reached a high point when Moranis and the writing team won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Writing in a variety or music program for the episode Moral Majority Show. The win proved that a Canadian sketch show could outshine major US comedy programs. It also cemented SCTV's future and helped each cast member step confidently toward Hollywood. For Moranis, it was another sign that every step he had taken, even the failed ones, had led him to something bigger. Ironically, he almost quit SCTV during the early pilots. He doubted whether he belonged there. He questioned his place in the cast. Dave Thomas convinced him to stay, and soon after, Bob and Doug exploded into a cultural wave. The Great White North album went triple platinum in Canada, climbed the US charts, and became one of the best-selling comedy albums of its time. Hollywood noticed. Offers started to appear. Movies followed. What began as uncertainty became one of the most defining moments of his career. His leap into film came fast. Strange Brew arrived in 1983. It began as a sketch and grew into a full-length feature that he co-wrote, co-directed, and starred in. The film had a budget of $4 million and earned $8.57 million worldwide. It opened at number 3 at the US box office during its first weekend. Critics were mixed, but audiences adored it. They celebrated the loose, surreal humor and the charm of Bob and Doug on the big screen. The movie earned a cult following and proved that Canadian comedians could make their mark in theaters across North America. Then he surprised everyone. In 1984, he appeared in Streets of Fire as Billy Fish, a nervous manager trying to rescue a kidnapped singer. The film was dramatic, stylish, and nothing like the comedy world he usually lived in. The $13 million production only made $8 million and was considered a flop, but Moranis' performance showed that he could stretch himself far beyond sketch comedy. It gave him room to grow and hinted that he could handle serious roles if he wanted to. Later that same year, Ghostbusters changed everything. The role of Louis Tully had been offered to John Candy, but Candy dropped out. Moranis stepped in at the last moment. He improvised many of Louis's awkward, funny moments, and soon the character became one of the film's highlights. Ghostbusters earned $295 million worldwide, turned into a cultural giant, and pulled Moranis into mainstream Hollywood overnight. He brought a strange sweetness and jittery humor to Louis that fans still quote today. He rounded out 1984 with a smaller role in The Wild Life. The film never found its footing, struggled with critics, and faded quickly. Moranis felt frustrated by the weak character writing, and that experience marked the beginning of a deeper tension he often faced in Hollywood. Sometimes he felt sidelined. Sometimes the roles didn't match his ability, but even the disappointments shaped him. Before all these highs, he had appeared in Twilight Theater in 1982. The project failed to attract attention, yet somehow it caught Hollywood's eye just enough to open the next door. The failure didn't hold him down. It became a stepping stone, one of many moments where he proved he could take a blow and still move forward. Rick Moranis moved through the mid-'80s with a kind of wild momentum that kept pulling him forward. One moment, he was this quirky supporting actor. The next, he was shaping whole films with his timing and his rewrites. It really began in 1985 when he played Morty King in Brewster's Millions. He showed up ready to mimic Richard Pryor's every move, and something about the way he did it made the whole cast break. The studio noticed it too. They kept calling him back to rewrite his own lines, which almost never happened for supporting actors back then. His touches helped the movie bring in $42 million in North America, and suddenly, people were paying attention to him in a new way. It was a bright start. Then things dipped faster than he expected. Head Office and Club Paradise came next, both released between 1985 and 1986. Both flopped. One pulled in only $3.4 million and the other barely crossed $12.3 million. Moranis had just come off Ghostbusters and Brewster's Millions, so studios expected easy wins. Instead, he pushed back on scripts, demanded changes, and tried to shape the movies around what he knew was funny. It rattled executives who weren't used to a new comedian telling them how the story should go. His rising star slowed for a moment, and the whispers started. Yet he kept holding his ground. He believed in his instinct, and that instinct led him somewhere surprising. In 1986, Little Shop of Horrors landed in his lap. He stepped into the role of Seymour Krelborn, the awkward florist who sings his heart out next to a man-eating plant. The movie carried a $25 million budget and used massive puppetry rigs, but the real heart came from Moranis and Ellen Greene. Suddenly, Seymour became unforgettable. Audiences loved the softness he brought. Critics praised his vocals on Suddenly, Seymour, and his performance sparked Emmy talk. The movie earned $39 million in North America and climbed to $54 million worldwide. It felt like he had taken all the lessons from those earlier setbacks and poured them into a character who was nervous, gentle, and strangely heroic. That comeback set him up for the next leap. Then came 1987. Spaceballs arrived, and Rick stepped into the giant boots of Dark Helmet, a parody of Darth Vader that nobody else could have played with such silly confidence. He kept ad-libbing tiny moments that Mel Brooks later called pure genius. What started as a smaller part exploded into one of the most quoted roles of the decade. The movie crossed 103 million worldwide and placed Moranis right back on top. It was funny to see how quickly the industry changed its mind about him. Those 3 years from 1985 to 1987 shaped his rise, his fall, and his return, and it all came together in a way that only his strange path could create. Long before all that success, though, he had a near miss that still surprises people. Back in 1985, he was originally cast in The Breakfast Club as the school janitor, but after a week, he was fired. Producer Ned Tannen said his performance was too comedic for such a serious story, and the role was recast. The movie went on to become a classic without him, and that moment became one of those odd forks in the road. Sometimes, one small turn shifts an entire career. As the decade rolled on, Moranis kept working, and in 1989, he returned for Ghostbusters the 2. Tontu. He played Louis Tully again, but this time the experience felt heavier. The movie earned $215 million worldwide, but he later said the magic wasn't the same. The production dragged with script problems and cast disputes. Every major decision had to be agreed on by all the original stars, and it slowed things down. His scenes, including the courtroom moment, were shot in New York using 500 extras and huge set builds. The scale was impressive, but the spark felt dimmer to him, and he walked away feeling that the sequel never matched the first film's charm. That same year, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids turned everything around again. Moranis played Wayne Szalinski, the well-meaning inventor who shrinks his children, and the movie exploded. It made $222 million and launched a whole franchise. Behind the scenes, the shoot was rough. Child actors everywhere, complex rigs, puppet work, stop motion, and strange visuals like the bee sequence where tiny figures were strapped to a moving setup filmed with real bees. He often joked that herding kids was harder than wrestling with a ghost dog. Still, the result became a classic, and it pushed his fame even higher. Parenthood also came out in 1989, with Moranis playing Nathan Huffner. His scenes were often small, but he stole them with quiet awkwardness. The movie earned him the American Comedy Award for Funniest Supporting Actor in 1990. It was one of those roles that didn't need big moments. He just had to be himself, and people felt it. Then came My Blue Heaven in 1990. He played FBI agent Barney Cooper Smith opposite Steve Martin, and the shoot was long and tiring. They filmed across California, and Moranis spent weeks away from home. It made him think deeply about what mattered most. The movie earned around $6 million, and although it found a cult audience later, it planted something inside him at the time. Something that pulled him toward home. That feeling grew stronger in 1991 when he turned down City Slickers. The role of Phil Berquist was his, but he refused it because his wife Anne was battling cancer. She needed him. Their kids needed him. So he stayed home. It changed everything, because that choice opened the door to an entirely different path for him. Rick Moranis married Ann Belsky in 1986. She was a gifted makeup designer who had worked on major projects, and together they built a loving life in New York. Their daughter Rachel arrived in 1987, and their son Mitchell in 1989. It was a warm, close family, full of quiet moments far away from flashing cameras. But in 1989, Anne was diagnosed with breast cancer. She fought hard for almost 2 years, and even while her illness grew worse, she stayed present for her children. Rick balanced filming Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and caring for his family, moving between set life and home life with a kind of emotional juggling that only a few people ever truly understand. Anne passed away on February 4, 1991, at just 35 years old. Her loss shook everything he knew. After she died, he stepped back from Hollywood. He chose to be a single parent and give his children steady days instead of movie sets and long nights. He stayed in New York. He took only voice roles so he could work from home. He turned down event invitations, big studio offers, and opportunities that would have made him even more famous. He wanted quiet mornings with his kids and dinners at home. He protected them from publicity and never used their names in interviews. He lived his life on his own terms, and people were curious because he didn't follow the path most actors took. During those years, he worked on Gravedale High in 1990, voicing Max Schneider. It was a small show, only 13 episodes, but it gave him a creative outlet when he needed something steady and manageable. It let him stay close to home, and that mattered more than anything else. Rick Moranis stepped into 1992 with the kind of momentum most actors would dream about. Honey, I Blew Up the Kid arrived that summer and opened at #1 with more than $11 million in its first weekend. It climbed to almost $115 million worldwide on a $32 million budget, and everyone at Disney celebrated the win. The jokes landed. The effects amazed families. Kids dragged their parents back for repeat showings. But while the numbers kept rising, Moranis felt something slipping. He kept asking for rewrites that never came. The studio wanted a safe sequel. He wanted something sharper. He later said the success almost felt hollow because he could feel the creative walls closing in. And that slow frustration began pushing him away from the Hollywood machine he had been part of for years. A year later came Splitting Heirs, and this time the story went in the opposite direction. The movie barely pulled in $3.2 million, and critics didn't hold back. Moranis played Henry Bullock, an American who suddenly finds himself tied to a British estate, but the script felt flat, and the cast chemistry never clicked. Even the set didn't feel easy. People later talked about tension between Moranis and Ricki Lake that made the shoot feel rushed and uneven. When the movie collapsed at the box office, it marked a quiet shift in Moranis' career. He had gone from a global hit to a project that barely left a mark, and that contrast pushed him further away from leading roles. Then came The Flintstones in 1994. It became one of the biggest movies of the year, with $341 million earned worldwide. Moranis played Barney Rubble, and audiences loved him, but he struggled through every moment of filming. The iconic green suit was stiff and scorching, and long days inside it drained him. The world saw tie-in games and fast food promotions and toys everywhere. He only remembered how hard it was to breathe inside that suit. Even with the success, the experience left him more exhausted than proud, and the thought of doing another giant franchise felt heavier than ever. Later that same year came Little Giants. On paper, it had all the pieces. A family sports comedy with Moranis and Ed O'Neill sounded like a hit. Instead, it barely made $19.3 million on a $20 million budget. Reviews called it predictable and dull. Moranis felt that disappointment more deeply than he expected. 2 years later, Big Bully followed and fell even harder, pulling in only $2 million on a $15 million budget. Rumors spread about tension with Norm Macdonald and a chaotic shoot. By the time the movie wrapped, Moranis was worn down by the back-to-back failures. Big Bully became his last theatrical film before he quietly walked away. In 1997, Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves went straight to video, and that release said everything without saying much. Moranis returned once more as Wayne Selinsky, but the budget was tiny, the promotion almost non-existent, and the franchise had lost its spark. The movie landed with barely a sound, but it marked his final on-camera role. After his wife passed away in 1991, he had been raising their children alone, and he finally chose to step away completely. Hollywood kept calling. He kept saying no. He wasn't burned out by acting. He simply wanted to be present for his kids. From 1997 to 2019, Moranis disappeared from blockbusters, but he didn't disappear from life. He told USA Today that what started as a small break turned into a long one because he didn't miss acting enough to return. He chose work he could do from home so he wouldn't miss a moment with his children. Voice roles in Brother Bear in 2003 and 2006 kept him active without pulling him away from family. People in Hollywood wondered if something was wrong. He felt completely at peace, making music, raising his kids, and moving through life without the pressure of expectations. Then came a surprise. In 2005, he released a country-style parody album called The Agoraphobic Cowboy, and it earned a Grammy nomination for Best Comedy Album. He recorded the whole thing in a Brooklyn apartment. A year later, he performed Press Pound on Conan O'Brien and showed a side of himself that movies never quite captured. In 2013, he released My Mother's Brisket, a comedy album that leaned into his Jewish roots and dry humor. Both albums found small, loyal audiences and reminded everyone that Moranis was still creating, just not in the places people expected. In 2009, he returned to his old SCTV roots with the animated Bob and Doug series. The show ran for 15 episodes and brought back the Maple Lake chaos that fans loved. He didn't voice Bob this time. Dave Coulier stepped in while Moranis stayed behind the scenes as an executive producer. It surprised people, but it also showed how much he valued choosing when and how he wanted to show up. Ghostbusters called twice, once in 2013 and again in 2016. Both times he turned down the chance to return as Louis Tully. He said it made no sense to show up for a single scene in something he had already done decades earlier. He felt no pressure to say yes just because everyone else did. It shaped his image as someone who valued personal choice more than nostalgia. In 1993, he appeared in Donald Fagen's video Tomorrow's Girls, playing an alien husband. After that, he only appeared in public at small fan conventions where he would sign autographs, chat with fans, and occasionally perform tiny sketches. These rare glimpses kept fans connected to him, but they also reminded everyone how intentional he had become about protecting his privacy. In 2020, everything paused when Moranis was assaulted on Central Park West. It was early morning on October 1st when Marquise Ventura ran up and punched him in the head without warning. Moranis, then 67, fell hard and suffered injuries to his head, back, and hip. He walked himself to the hospital. Cameras caught the attack, and the footage spread everywhere. Ventura was arrested a month later and eventually pleaded guilty. Moranis never turned the event into a media moment. He stayed silent, recovered privately, and refused to chase lawsuits or attention. That same year, Disney announced Shrunk, a new sequel with Moranis returning to the role that made him famous. Fans saw it as a huge moment. Not only was Wayne Szalinski back, but Joe Johnston was supposed to direct. Josh Gad would play the adult son trying to follow his father's path. Production was set to start in early 2020, but when the pandemic hit in March, everything shut down. As of 2024, Disney has not revived the project, leaving fans still waiting for news. Then something unexpected happened. In September 2020, he appeared in a Mint Mobile commercial with Ryan Reynolds. It was a short, strange, funny spot that instantly went viral. For many people, it felt like the return they had been waiting decades to see. Moranis looked calm, gentle, and slightly amused, and fans exploded with excitement. One ad was enough to remind the world how much they had missed him. A month later, he appeared on Prop Culture on Disney+, talking about making honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and sharing memories of Joe Johnston and the old sets. It was one of his first long interviews in years. Fans called it the start of the Moraniscence. He was warm, honest, and funny, and viewers saw how much of the original film's charm had come from him. Through all of it, he held on to the same message he had told The Hollywood Reporter in 2015. He wasn't retired. He was selective. He said he didn't want repeats and didn't want to chase roles just because they were offered. He valued family and privacy above everything else. That careful approach made his next move even more surprising. In June 2025, Amazon MGM Studios confirmed that Rick Moranis would return as Lord Dark Helmet in Spaceballs 2. It would be his first live-action movie in almost 30 years. Filming began in Australia and wrapped in December 2025. The movie is set for a 2027 release, and the leaked table-read photo showed Moranis smiling and leaning into the moment, as if he had finally found something worth returning for. He said the project felt worthy, not because of nostalgia, but because it felt fresh and meaningful. Mel Brooks, now 99, joined the sequel too, reprising his roles as Yogurt and President Scroob. He hasn't acted in a live-action film since 2005, but he joined with a zoom camera and the same spark that made him a legend. Josh Gad co-wrote the script and produced the film, bringing in a new cast alongside the old one and shaping a story that blends parody across Star Wars, Alien, Star Trek, and more. By the end of 2025, filming had wrapped, and fans had something real to look forward to. For the first time since the late 90s, Rick Moranis was back on a movie set, not out of obligation or nostalgia, but because he wanted to be there. And that choice, more than anything, made his return feel like one of the most surprising and heartfelt comebacks Hollywood has seen in decades.